The wind was a blade against his skin, honed sharp by the high, lonely peaks of the San Juan Mountains. It carried the scent of pine and the coming of a deeper cold, a promise of the snow that would soon bury the world in white silence. Elias moved through the aspen grove with a quiet that was part of the landscape itself, his moccasins making no sound on the carpet of fallen leaves. He was checking his snares, a ritual as old as his time in this place, his hands raw from the chill but steady. He was a man made of sinew and silence, his face a map of sun and sorrow, his dark eyes holding a stillness that could be mistaken for peace. It was not peace. It was resignation. He stopped. The air was wrong. The usual chatter of a squirrel, the distant call of a hawk, all gone. There was only the mournful rush of the wind through the skeletal branches. Then he saw it. A splash of white against the gray bark of an ancient cottonwood that stood alone in a small clearing, its branches like gnarled arms raised in supplication. It was a woman, hanging. The rope was new, a stark yellow against the weather-beaten trunk. Her form was slight, obscured by the white folds of a religious habit, her bare feet dangling a few inches above the frozen ground. Anun. A tremor went through him, a vibration from a life he had long since abandoned. He moved closer, his rifle held loose in his grip. Her head was canted at an impossible angle, a cascade of blonde hair, startlingly bright in the gray light, obscuring her face. It was the carving on her skin that stopped his breath. Hacked into the pale flesh of her forearm, the letters crude and deep, filled with drying blood. Apache Loa. The words were a brand, a judgment delivered and executed. Elias felt the phantom sting of a whip across his own back, a memory of a different kind of judgment. The slur was aimed at him, at the blood of his mother that marked him as other, that had driven him from the world of men into this high exile. He was the Apache they hated, the ghost they whispered about in the towns below. He reached for his knife, the blade worn smooth with use. He would cut her down. It was the only decency left to offer. As his fingers touched the rough hemp of the rope, a sound pricked the silence. Not the wind. A whimper, small and thin, nearly lost. His head snapped toward a dense thicket of wild rose, its thorns a dark, tangled cage. He moved toward it, his steps now wary, deliberate. He parted the branches, ignoring the thorns that tore at his buckskin sleeve. Curled in the heart of the thicket was a child. A girl, no older than 7. Her simple calico dress ripped, her face and arms crosshatched with bleeding scratches. Her eyes were wide with a terror so profound it had stolen her voice. In her small, dirty fist, she clutched a rosary made of knotted cord and polished river stones. She had seen it all. The realization landed in Elias's gut like a stone. She was the witness, and he, by finding her, was now her keeper. He sheathed his knife. The dead could wait. The living could not. He slowly extended a hand, palm up, the gesture as non-threatening as he could make it. The girl flinched, pressing herself deeper into the thorns. Her gaze darted from his face to the hanging woman and back again. He saw himself reflected in her terror, the dark hair, the high cheekbones, the color of his skin that named him savage in the minds of the men who had done this. He pulled his hand back. He turned without a word and walked to the cottonwood. With methodical precision, he cut the rope. The body fell with a soft, final thud. He gently turned her over, pulling the screen of blonde hair away from a face that had been pretty once. Now it was a mask of agony. Sister Agnes. He remembered hearing the name in a trader's gossip. The new nun at the mission down in the valley, the one with the sunny disposition. He wrapped her in his spare blanket, a rough wool thing, lifting her with a gentleness that seemed foreign to his calloused hands. He carried her back towards his cabin, not looking back to see if the child followed. He knew she would. Where else could she go? The world had been reduced to him, a dangerous man, and the terrible memory behind her. He heard the faint rustle of her movement, a frightened animal trailing a predator, bound by a shared thread of violence. The cabin was small, built of hand-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss, hunkered down against the mountain slope as if hiding from God. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, a lonely signal in the vast wilderness. He laid Sister Agnes on the packed earth outside, near a small cluster of blue spruce. He took up a shovel and began to dig. The ground was hard, resisting every thrust. The girl watched from the edge of the trees, a small, still figure in the growing dusk. She did not move, did not make a sound. She just watched as he carved a space in the unyielding earth for the woman who had protected her. He worked until his shoulders burned and the hole was deep enough. He placed the body within it, then paused. He went into the cabin and returned with a small, carved wooden cross he had made years ago for a grave that was now 1,000 miles and a lifetime away. He drove it into the soil at the head of the grave. Only then did he begin to fill it, the rhythmic scrape and fall of the dirt the only sound in the twilight. When it was done, he stood for a moment, his head bowed. Not a prayer, but an acknowledgement, a debt. He turned and walked into the warmth of his cabin, leaving the door ajar. The fire in the stone hearth crackled, a small, defiant heart of light and heat against the encroaching night. He ladled stew from the iron pot into a wooden bowl and set it on the floor near the fire. He sat in his usual chair, a block of wood smoothed by years of use, and began to clean his rifle, his movements economical and precise. A long time passed. The wind howled outside, a beast trying to claw its way in. Then, a shadow fell across the doorway. The girl stood there, hesitating, her small frame silhouetted against the deep blue of the night. She looked at him, then at the bowl of stew. The aroma of rabbit and wild carrot filled the small space. Elias didn't look up from his work. He continued to draw the oiled cloth down the barrel of the rifle, his presence as solid and unmoving as the mountain itself. Finally, she crept inside, a mouse entering a lion's den. She huddled by the fire, as far from him as the small room would allow, and picked up the bowl. She ate with the desperation of a starved animal, her small hands shaking. When she was finished, she set the empty bowl down and drew her knees to her chest, her eyes fixed on the flames. She did not speak. The days that followed were measured in silence. Elias moved about his life with the same solitary rhythm he always had, but with a new, subtle awareness of the small ghost in his home. He hunted, he chopped wood, he sat for long hours tanning a deer hide. He never spoke to her directly, never asked her name. The questions were a violation she could not bear. He communicated in offerings. A piece of dried apple left on the hearth, a cup of warm broth, a softer pelt to sleep on. She remained a creature of instinct and fear. She flinched when he stood too quickly. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, followed his every move, ready for the violence she had come to expect from the world. But the violence never came. Instead, there was only the quiet provision, the steady, predictable presence of this dark, silent man. One morning, he looked out the cabin's single window and saw her standing at the nun's grave. She had placed a single, resilient Indian paintbrush, its fiery red a stark contrast to the drab earth, at the base of the wooden cross. It was the first act of will he had seen from her, a small gesture of remembrance that spoke more than any words. That afternoon, as he sat by the fire, he took a small block of pine and began to carve. His knife, the same one that could skin a buck or gut a fish, moved with surprising delicacy. The shavings fell away to reveal the shape of a bird, its wings half spread as if about to take flight. He sanded it smooth with a piece of sandstone until it felt warm and alive in his palm. He left it on her sleeping pelt that night while she slept, a fitful, whimpering sleep. The next morning, he saw her sitting by the fire, turning the wooden bird over and over in her small hands. Her fingers traced the lines of its wings, the curve of its head. She did not look at him, but he felt a subtle shift in the cabin's atmosphere. The sharp edge of her fear had softened, just a little. The first snowflakes began to fall that evening, fat, wet flakes that clung to the pines and melted on the warm ground. It was a warning. The real winter was coming, the deep snows that would seal the high passes and lock them in together. Elias watched the snow, a knot tightening in his chest. The snow would cover their tracks, but it would also trap them. He looked at his reflection in the dark glass of the windowpane, a face he rarely saw, the high cheekbones and straight, black hair of his mother's people. He ran a hand over the faint, silvery lines that webbed the skin of his back beneath his shirt, relics from the day his father's world had tried to beat his mother's blood out of him. He had lost his wife, his son, in a fire set by men whose faces were twisted with the same righteous hate as the men who had carved up Sister Agnes. He had failed to protect them. He had fled, seeking a penance of solitude. Now solitude was gone. He was no longer just a man hiding from his ghosts. He was a guardian. The next day, the snow came in earnest, a white curtain driven by a furious wind. The world beyond the cabin dissolved into a swirling vortex of white. And through the blizzard they came. 3 riders, hunched against the gale, their figures dark apparitions in the maelstrom. Elias saw them from the window, his body instantly rigid. He grabbed his rifle from its pegs on the wall. The girl, seeing the look on his face, scrambled from the fire and pressed herself into the darkest corner of the cabin, her breath coming in tiny, panicked gasps. She clutched the wooden bird to her chest like a shield. The riders stopped a short distance from the cabin, their horses steaming in the cold. One man dismounted, a tall figure in a long duster, his face shielded by a low-brimmed hat. Elias recognized the cruel set of his jaw even from a distance. Silas Kane, a rancher from the lowlands, a man known for his harsh piety and his deeper hatred of the Apache. "Hello, the cabin." Silas's voice was a whip crack against the wind. "We're looking for a lost child. There was a tragedy down the way. The poor sister from the mission. Killed by a savage." Elias remained silent, his rifle steady in his hands. He watched Silas's cold eyes scan the cabin, lingering on the thin plume of smoke rising from the chimney. "We know someone's in there," Silas called again, his voice laced with menace. "The girl saw what happened. She's a witness. We mean to see her to safety." The lie was as thin as the freezing air. In the corner, the girl began to tremble uncontrollably. A low, guttural sound escaped her throat, a sound of pure animal terror. Silas heard it. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "So, you've got her in there. Send the girl out. We won't harm you. You have my word as a God-fearing man." He paused, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial sneer. "Unless, of course, you're the Apache filth that did it. We heard one of you was hiding up here." A real lover of God's women, Elias felt the girl's fear like a physical blow. He saw his own past rising up to consume him. The fire, the screams, the failure. Not again. He would not fail again. The storm raged, trapping them all in its white fury. Silas and his men took shelter in a rocky outcrop, their dark shapes barely visible through the driving snow. They would wait. They were patient hunters. But so was he. This was his mountain. This was his ground. He turned to the girl. Her face was a pale, tear-streaked oval in the dim light. He knelt before her, the movement slow and deliberate. He pointed to the heavy wooden trapdoor in the floor that led to the small root cellar. "Hide," he said. His voice was rough from disuse, a gravelly sound that made her flinch. He softened his expression, a feat that felt monumental. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a brief, firm pressure. "Promise." For the first time, she did not pull away. She looked into his dark eyes, and in them, she saw not a monster, but a reflection of her own fierce will to survive. She gave a single, jerky nod. He helped her into the dark, cold space below, then closed the heavy door over her. He took a moment, listening to the scream of the wind. It was his only ally. He checked his rifle, slipped his knife from its sheath, and moved to the back wall of the cabin. There, hidden behind a stack of firewood, was a small, shuttered opening he had built for just such a purpose. An escape, an ambush. He slipped out into the blizzard, a ghost swallowed by the white chaos. The cold was a physical shock, the wind tearing the breath from his lungs. He was invisible. He moved through the storm with an inherited knowledge, his feet sure on the treacherous ground. He circled wide, coming up behind the outcrop where the men were huddled, their backs to the wind. He was the savage they feared, the spirit of the mountain they could not comprehend. The first man died without a sound, a hand over his mouth, a knife blade drawn swiftly across his throat. The wind and snow swallowed the brief struggle. The second man grew nervous, calling out to his companion. He stood up, peering into the whiteout. Elias used the sound to pinpoint him. He loosed a silent arrow from the short bow he'd grabbed, a weapon of his mother's people. The arrow took the man in the chest, and he fell backward with a choked cry that was ripped away by the gale. Silas spun around, his pistol drawn, his eyes wild with fear and rage. "Show yourself, you coward!" he screamed into the storm. Elias remained hidden, a patient predator letting his prey's fear do the work. "She was a traitor!" Silas shrieked, his voice cracking with a mad fury. "Teaching our words to their filthy children, laying hands on them. She got what a squaw lover deserves." The confession hung in the air, a poisonous vapor. Now it was just the two of them. Elias moved, a shadow detaching from the rocks. He wanted Silas to see him. He stepped into the small clearing before the outcrop, his knife in one hand, a hatchet in the other. Silas stared, his face a mask of disbelief and hatred. "You," he breathed. He raised his pistol and fired. The shot was deafening. Elias felt a searing pain rip through his side, staggering him. He grunted, dropping to one knee. Silas laughed, a raw, ugly sound, and strode forward to finish him. But Elias was not broken. He lunged from his crouched position, ignoring the fire in his ribs. He drove his body into Silas, sending them both tumbling into a deep snowdrift near the nun's grave. The fight was ugly and primal. Not a duel of marksmen, but a desperate, grunting struggle of two animals in the snow. Silas was bigger, heavier, but Elias was fueled by a lifetime of suppressed rage and a desperate need for redemption. He twisted, ignoring the pain, and brought his knife up, driving it deep. Silas gasped, his eyes wide with surprise, a red flower blooming on his chest. He collapsed, his blood a vivid stain on the pure white snow, just feet from the cross that marked Sister Agnes's final resting place. Elias lay in the snow for a long moment, the world spinning, the pain in his side a roaring fire. He pushed himself up, his movements slow and agonizing. He staggered back to the cabin, leaving the dead to the storm. The wind was beginning to die down, the thick curtain of snow thinning. He stumbled through the door, collapsing against it as he forced it shut. He slid to the floor, leaving a smear of blood on the wood. He lay there, breathing in ragged gasps, until he heard a faint scratching from below, the trapdoor. He crawled, every movement in agony, and pushed it open. The girl looked up, her face pale, her eyes enormous in the gloom. She saw the blood, the exhaustion, the pain etched on his face. She saw that he was hurt, but he was alive. He had come back. She climbed out of the cellar, her movements hesitant. She knelt beside him, her fear finally giving way to something else. Tentatively, as if touching fire, she reached out a small, trembling hand and laid it gently on the uninjured part of his arm. It was a gesture of profound, unspoken care. Elias looked at her, a faint, pained smile touching his lips. The storm outside was breaking. A single ray of pale sunlight pierced the clouds, slanting through the window and illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He reached into the pocket of his blood-soaked shirt and pulled out the small, knotted rosary she had dropped in the thicket. He pressed it into her hand. She closed her small fingers around the polished river stones. She looked from the rosary in her hand to his tired, battered face. Her lips parted. "Elias," she said. The name was a tiny, fragile thing, rusty from disuse. It was the first word she had spoken. It was the first time in a decade he had heard his own name spoken without contempt. A great, shuddering breath escaped him, releasing a weight of grief he hadn't known he was still carrying. He gave a slight, weary nod. The snow had stopped. Outside the window, the world was blanketed in a deep, cleansing silence. The storm was over. Inside the small cabin, two survivors, a man and a child, sat together in the quiet dawn. A family born of violence, now bound by the hope of a new beginning.